I wanted to kickstart this off. I'm going to be moderating this panel. My name is Justine, and in order to get it started, I'm actually going to call up our panelists that you will learn from today. So Medita is a Senior Director of Product of Developer Experience at PayPal, so please join us.
I'll try to.
I would also like to welcome Austen, who is a lead cloud DevOps engineer at Southwest Airlines. And Sathya, who might get the award for furthest traveled. She came all the way from Australia for this. So she might be a little jet lagged, but she's our API platform leader at Medibank. So thank you, everybody, whether you traveled near or far. And today we are going to be discussing a little bit of new strategies and tactics to do API development and testing with these three from different points of view. So to kick it off, actually, I'd love to hear from Mudita at PayPal from a PM perspective. How does your product team use Postman for APIs? And maybe if you could delve into a little bit of like, what value you get from using it as a PM and how you collaborate and show it off.
So we understand we're right between you and Trevor Noah's sessions, so we absolutely want to make it worth your while by just infusing a lot of conversational style discussion today. So at PayPal, actually, we started partnering heavily with Postman, first on our internal API network, but then we also saw a huge propensity, and actually our customers, our external developers came and said, we want the collections to be published on the public network, and why don't we actually just expose those? So I'll be very honest to say we were a little late, but actually accelerated our partnership with developers, external developers who use PayPal immensely. So actually we're the #1 API collection in FinTech, which we're very proud of, and we're so glad to collect the award today. So absolutely love our partnership with Postman. And it came from the product angle very much as a need from the customer. So talk about being customer-centric. Our customers were saying that they wanted collections that they wanted to use in order to make sure they were doing API-first development. And we followed suit. In about 3 months' time of extreme agile style of development, we launched the first collection and just kept working at it. And today we have a collection of about 10 plus APIs, both on REST as well as GraphQL. And in addition with that, we use some of the new fun tools that Postman has put out with flows that actually really dispel what an API does in a very visual fashion. So we've truly enjoyed being customer-centric, but then also enjoyed the partnership with Postman to be very customer-first in our approach.
Awesome. And I forgot to mention that at the end there will be a 5-minute Q&A. So we'll have some handlers with Mike who will run around and let you guys ask your questions. So if you have any, hang tight, write them down, and we will make sure we get to them at the end. So actually, I would like to surface a question in order. So Austen, I would love to hear a little bit from you about why API testing is critical for your team, and like what impact does it have if it's not done correctly?
Sure. So my team, it's really the platform engineering team for our digital channels, so southwest.com and the mobile apps. And so from that perspective, these APIs are powering those user experiences, but they're very much for an internal audience. We don't have a public portal or any public access to these, so we really develop them in that context. But the testing around these, it's interesting because the dev pods are continuously building unit tests as they're building their APIs. And then they're layering on sort of what we call an isolation test, which is actually calls against a real running API, but stubbed downstream services. And we're doing that in rest assured as part, and all that runs in our CI pipeline. But then additionally, we use Postman when we start getting into the real data testing scenario. So we're starting to integrate integrate with other systems. Postman is used both manually, but also with automated test suites in there to run across all of that. So I would say we kind of have to balance the use of each of those to make sure we cover most of our bases. Yeah, that's kind of the full concept of it.
Awesome. And before I actually get to our third panelist, I would love to hear a little bit about like the formation of the teams and how you test and like if there's QA, if dev's doing it, and how you guys are structured.
Yeah, that's a great question. So as far as the way the team is structured, we're doing agile software development with dev pods. There are software engineers in these pods, but also QAs, with also a couple of supporting functions around that. The pods that are specifically developing APIs exclusively do have dedicated testing resources that are building both the test suites in Postman, but also running some manual tests as well. We're looking to get more of that automated, with running Postman a little bit more against real data in the pipeline. But stability of downstream services can sometimes limit how often you can use those live services in an automated sense. So that's really the structure of the pod testing. And then there is another layer of testing on top of that is more at the greater digital platforms organization that is more full stack testing from the user experience down. So from the mobile apps and the desktop website, exercising those APIs.
Awesome. Thanks for the overview. And I'd actually love to hear from the Medibank side. A little bit of how you guys do it and how it might differ or be aligned or the same, just so that we can give the audience some different strategies on how to do it.
So first of all, thanks for having me here. I'm just thrilled to be here all the way from Melbourne, representing Australia here. So so API testing is very crucial. We understand that, and we do quite a lot of API automation testing within our teams. And QAs are embedded into our squads, and we push quite very minimal manual testing, but lots of API automation per se. But we are in the journey of lots of shift left testing that we could do, and pushing, and it's a part of mindset shift, I would say. So getting developers engaged, and apart from unit tests, building quite a lot of component tests with mocks and building that capability that they can functionally make it quite stable is very important. And API testing plays a very critical role. So we integrated part of our pipelines as well, using Newman CLI and things like that. But we are not there at the edge of it, but we are starting to understand shift left testing is important, and enabling our QA engineers to be more consultant and give those scenarios at the start of the development lifecycle. So yes, we are using Postman quite a lot, and with the features that's been shown, I have quite a lot to go back and share with them and feel excited about.
Awesome. I'm actually going to stick with you and kind of go down the line, because I think this question might apply to all of you. Since you kind of mentioned shift left and starting at the beginning of the development cycle, at what point in your API development process do you tend to solicit feedback, and how and from who?
Yes. In my opinion or experience, essentially we need to get the feedback right from the design phase of your services, essentially APIs. So in one of our recent programs where we developed a partner API, the team collaborated with the business product teams essentially to build the models, understand what is the need of the business. And that's a game changer essentially, because usually testing or integration teams are more tech focused, but up there talking to the business, they are able to understand what the business needs are and where it can be extensible for later as well. So they enjoyed that process, and I hope that that's the norm of working in the future within my team. But yeah, so I believe that is very important if we have to start building APIs as products, because you understand the business language, you put those business language into work rather than tech core specific languages. So we do start from architects and core platforms and consumer teams, but there are push towards bringing product focused and solicit feedback right from there, and that's more efficient, I believe. And I'm personally interested to hear from Mudita, because it's a PayPal as a product. How do they engage product teams? I would like to know that too.
Absolutely. Sure.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. No. So I'll expand on the question or answer a little bit, and then zoom in on the discussion. So if we think about an external developer portal, the risk and the reward becomes a little bit larger, right? You have less there's a little bit of an acumen that you have to bring to the entire journey by understanding the developer journey a little bit more precisely. So typically our journey in the product space in PayPal starts with feedback that we get from the market in multiple ways. One is what the fintech market itself is doing, and where the customers are saying, we need this type of a product, it's going to get productized via an API. So that's very classic. Obviously, you're going to go and study the market and figure out where the gaps are and fill those gaps. The second piece is all the good innovation that's happening in tech, where you're going to take an experimental approach and try a few things. They might fall flat on your face, or they might be amazing, like our partnership with Postman. And then last but not the least, you get direct survey and feedback, obviously, from your customers who've been on the journey with you, and they're saying that, hey, we need this gap met, or this is something cool happening, are you thinking about it? So we take roughly those 3 or 4 areas of feedback. And then lastly, I'm so sorry, I should mention our sales and professional services teams, who are often working directly with the customer, will bring back a lot of that as well. So our product life cycle often starts with what the market and the customers are saying, and we kind of bring them back. However, the fundamentals don't change based on what you said, is you take all of that, you will still have to go through the stack ranking, the prioritization mechanism of where the market needs to move, where the company needs to move, where the customers are expecting you to move, and then figure out what that roadmap is going to be using the common tool sets and tool chains that we would need to bring. Now, now what's a little bit more interesting for PayPal is we are a fintech. There's money involved, so you have to really make sure fraud, risk, compliance, regulation is all something that is tightly held under the belt, and we are doing the right thing for our customers' money. So the stakes just become so much more higher for us anytime we try to put out a release. So our approach is, I think you were talking about this in the morning as well, is how do you think about partner or like by invitation only APIs, and how are you going to expose those? And those could be your limited release kind of sets that you put out to customers who are co-developing with you, testing early with you, et cetera, giving you feedback to make your product more robust, and then slowly ramping on a globally or generally available path. One of the things that we often have to think about is, how does regulation then hit you across various geos? Our European markets work very differently than the American markets versus LATAM versus Asia Pacific, because obviously you have to operate within those constraints. So that means the rules of the game and the way your API product itself will work a little bit differently. So there's just a lot more matrixed ways to think about your release management strategy, but the joy of building on the same core tool sets, I think we all enjoy that. So.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely, she's the one to head up if you want to learn some best practices for larger organizations on API management. So Austen, actually, I'd love to direct the same question towards you. At what point in your API development process do you start soliciting feedback?
Yeah, sure. So a little bit about what we used to do. So we used to do a lot of code-first API development. And what happened with that was we would see people develop the contract and all of the business logic from beginning to end. And it wouldn't be until the very end of that process and something's out there in a GitLab merge request that someone's actually able to start seeing feedback. And we did that for quite a few years, and about 2 years ago, we started shifting to design first. And what that really means is, specifically, All of our engineers are collaborating with both the consumers and our architects that are building the API in Open API. So they're actually designing an Open API spec at the beginning. We put that in a GitLab merge request, and feedback on that Open API spec is provided right there before any business logic is written. We actually have our Open API spec in a separate repository, so it's actually not possible for them to begin writing code until the Open API spec is produced. And we also do that by generating the source code from that Open API spec. So in order for them to introduce a feature or a contract change, they must change the Open API spec first. They must go through a review process, and out of that comes a package library in various languages for our different APIs that they then ingest, and that library provides all of the domain objects and interfaces that the developers can then begin working off of. So that really helps us kind of not only promote, but guarantee that people follow this process.
Awesome. I'd like to dig into that a little bit more, because I think actually right before this, we had somebody come up and ask a few questions on API first. And I think that's an important thing beyond just what the Wi-Fi code is for today, which is what is API first? And so he hit on it exactly, that it's actually API design first, and thinking of the design of the API before you do code, and not as an afterthought. So I'd really love to hear, just like double click on what were the benefits you saw from designing APIs first? And then also for those who are in the audience who might be like, cool, that's awesome, but I work for a really large organization, or not even a large organization, but I have no idea how to even shift the culture to start with that. How was that implemented? Because it was different 2 years back.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've invested an incredible amount in tooling and automation to make this successful. It's not as simple as saying, I've got an Open API spec, it's designed, now go. We've automated governance rules automatically around our APIs. So when people are changing the Open API spec, we ensure that certain security components are baked in, that people are following the correct standards. It might be as simple as the case of query parameters, or the case of properties, or the fact that all of the example objects in your Open API spec must match exactly to the schema. So we enforce many, many things that way in an automated fashion in the contract. It covers quite a bit. I talked a little bit about code generation, but also one thing that's really important to us, we're shifting more into AWS, into the cloud, and all of these existing APIs are being basically rebuilt in serverless technologies. And we're moving from Java to Python. So we're actually able to generate multiple programming languages from a singular contract, whether that's the on-prem implementation or the cloud implementation. And because we've got a single Open API spec sitting in front of both of those, we're actually able to slowly migrate traffic over time and ramp up to that cloud endpoint as we build confidence in its capabilities. So, using the Open API and the design from the beginning has really helped us a lot in that way. We've also had issues with documentation being accurate and being versioned properly. And this is where Postman really comes into the picture. We're syncing all of our Open API specs and versioning them in GitLab, but also pushing all of that into Postman and generating collections automatically through our CI pipelines, so that people can immediately start interacting with every version of our Open API spec in a more complete way. As many of you know, Open API really gives you just a little bit of interaction with an API, but Postman really unlocks so much more there. So yeah, that's just a list of some of the things. There's definitely more. Like one other thing I'll add, we're looking into mock servers, so that we can provide the ability for our front ends to begin integrating with these contracts before the back ends are ready. We're looking at that using Postman, and also just trying to find the best path for just any of our front end engineers to get going, because right now the delay for them to get their hands on a running API could be like weeks without design first. So.
Cool. I love it. So hopefully some of you guys took notes on how to implement that. I'm going to shift gears a little bit on, we talked some of the benefits that you might see but from designing API first. So I'd like to hear some more from you actually at Medibank. Sathya, as an API platform leader, what API metrics do you really care most about in your role, and what are you tracking?
So, so in terms of API metrics, we don't have end-to-end observability yet. So we do use New Relic and Splunk to get some metrics and dashboards out of it. But just in the per se of just the APIs, we are interested in the number of customers or consumers, error rates, the latencies, and the response times and things like that. We do run load testing and performance testing to ensure that the APIs are performing the way that they need to be. But yeah, so monitoring comes through that. But what would be more interesting and we might want to measure is the time taken for a developer to hit an API to say hello world. And we are not there yet, but that is something that we are keen, which means that some of the pitfalls or, the documentation and all are up to date and it makes developer lives easier. So I think that's something that we need to look for. But yeah, or else the main API metrics are the performance metrics that we constantly look and evaluate.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree. I got that question a lot today in terms of like, what should we track in order to ensure that our developers are using our APIs, and how do we get more developers to use our APIs, and what is the success metric that we should use in order to track that? So that was actually time to first API call was a hot topic today. So agreed. Actually, from the PayPal perspective, I'd love to hear a little bit of from a PM perspective, like what do you care? Because obviously you're showing to more stakeholders, you're showing to your CEO who might be like, I gave you a ton of resources, what did you build with this? Or customers. So I'm curious to hear from you on that.
It's a great question. And similar to, I think, the experience that you just spoke about is absolutely thinking about the customer first. And besides just the metrics themselves, it's actually observation of the journey of the developer as well, because it has to go hand in hand. So for example, you might have an invocation time of just, 5 minutes, I saw a response. Great, I must be doing well. But then what we found, at least like in our experience, is we want to make sure not only did you make that first call, we want you to stay as a customer with us. And so what does that look like? Did you get your app running, and are you continuing to do business with us? Because that's interesting to us. So understanding your entire funnel and journey is extremely important in the API space as well. But absolutely right, the first indicator of that is how quickly did we remove friction in your journey and got you to say hello to us fast. And so one of the asks that I had of Postman is, it would be great. A lot of the journeys are starting, let's say, off platform for us. Like, let's say you might be with your test credentials on Postman. I would love to understand, did you go live with your application? What happened to your end-to-end journey between PayPal and Postman, or between PayPal and the API itself? And so a couple of things we look at is certainly the satisfaction that a developer feels with the API reference documentation, with the sample code that we provide to them, the languages that we support these samples in, the request responses. Are you understanding the definitions of the parameters, the name value pairing? Does it make sense to you, et cetera? So those are fundamentals of API design that you should absolutely get feedback on, that could translate as a developer effort score for you as a metric, or a satisfaction score. And simply just observing that score may not be enough either. You might have to go then deeper via a survey tool to understand where people are feeling the friction point. So the metric that we deeply care about is not only the time to first API call, absolutely critical. It's going to be that effort score. It's going to be also evaluated via deeper surveys and understanding of the customer journey. then you should absolutely speak to your customers. If there are detractors, developers who are like, oh my God, I absolutely do not like this API, you need to sit with them, not you. We need to all sit with them and understand what's going on with our APIs, because essentially these are tools that people are using on behalf of us and our businesses. So we just need to make sure that we are honoring that contract in some ways with them. Last but not the least, there's one more thing I wanted to add is the time to integrate. Time to the first call, and then how long did it take you to really go live? Whether that's with an internal use case or an external use case is something fascinating as well. And that's where we're learning a lot, that people will start their journey and suddenly go missing. So what happened? And oftentimes merchants will come back and say, hey, I was just not ready to launch my business, which is wonderful. How can we then work with you to be a better partner? Or there was a problem in the journey. And so that's where we need to step up our game and make sure that we're doing better for our customers.
Awesome. I think it's really interesting as I was catching up with these three to prepare, like there's three very different consumer of the APIs, right? Like she's mainly customers, mainly internal, and then mainly internal and partners who are consuming the APIs. And so between that, obviously, PayPal is a household name. You have, I don't even know how many customers. I'm not going to even take a guess. But there's a lot of customers you have to communicate with, and as well as you two, in terms of API changes. Like, hey, I made a change. I touched on it a little bit in the keynote this morning. You need to get the word out that you made an API change. Otherwise, a lot of things will break, which for businesses, especially like PayPal, who are running APIs that make the business a lot of money, has high risk. So I'm curious, how do you guys ensure that API communications go out? And what are some learnings you've had along the way? And I would actually love to hear from you, Sathya, the Medibank first.
Yes, so in Medibank, because most of 80% of our consumers are internal pretty much, so it's only very traditional way of communicating the API changes through emails, through Slack, engaging the consumers, and we don't have a developer portal, so it does become hard. So it becomes very traditional ways of doing it, but also giving them enough time to, evolve or come into the next version of APIs and things. So you ensure about the backward compatibility and all that aspects of things. Obviously, a Confluence documentation and all that does help, but it's all traditional ways of doing, yeah. But yeah, with Postman, with updates and things like that, and integration with Slack, I just learned it's so much easier to communicate with our own teams, pretty much, Yeah. So we are not there yet to say, yes, we are communicating widely. It is a very traditional way, but I think with enterprise license, with Postman being there, I think that can help us quite a lot. Yeah.
Helpful, yeah. I look forward to following along the journey on with some of the stuff that we shipped today, like how you evolve that with your team. So how about at Southwest, Austen?
Yeah. So we've got a lot of this data that we pull from our open API specs when they're developed. We generate automatic change logs for those based on the developer's commit messages. And a lot of that is organized very nicely in GitLab. And our CI pipelines also automatically sync that into Postman. So we have the same versions and the same change logs visible in both places for users that are more on the consumer side, more on the API developer side. They kind of have both their options, but we keep that up to date. I will say, though, it is more of a pull model and less of a push model. We're not necessarily keeping track of maybe who is consuming that API and then pushing that information to them, but it's something that we definitely are looking at. It would be great for people that are consuming our APIs to be directly notified anytime a change is being even proposed, not even just that it is out there. So we're definitely looking at building some Slack integrations and pulling that same data that we already have, just in letting users subscribe and push it to them. Yep. So it's something we're considering heavily.
Awesome. We'll also be following along over there too. And how about PayPal?
Yes, I'll answer your first question first. So we're in about 200 markets, 400 million customers.
I would have been way off on my guess, by the way. So I'm really glad that I didn't guess.
There's more. We're 35 million merchants globally. So the stakes are fun. And then the developer portal that I'm so passionate about, like, what we eat and breathe and live for on a daily basis. We hosted about 5+ million customers or visitors on our site. Vanity metric, totally understand, but the one that we truly care about is about 60% of those 3 million or so log in and service their integrations with us. So we care deeply about the experience they're having. So in terms of speaking about sort of how do you build assets and tools and capabilities and then talk to the end customer about this good work that you're doing. So I'll tell you a story, and so brace yourself. When PayPal started a long, long time ago, we didn't have Postman, and we didn't have a lot of the standardized tooling capabilities. So we built our own, and we still use our own proprietary ecosystem. And I'm being very transparent and honest here because, of course, we're all passionate about developers. We're on a journey. So we're also figuring out what should be the maturation cycle of that platform, and ergo our partnership with various trend-setting and developer-centric platforms becomes very important. And release management and then making sure you're talking about your releases in an articulate fashion that developers can action on is something we need to do better. So I'll be the first person to say that this is a good learning for us, and I think standardization of platform to industry standards is going to truly help us. At the moment, we're on a journey where all of our API specifications are in open API standards, makes our life a lot easier. But at the same time, should we be on a non-proprietary platform, the release management, release notes, release communication will become a lot easier for us too. So we're on a journey for sure, and would love to talk to you later as well about all the good things that are happening.
Awesome. Yeah. Very exciting. I would love to start down the line again then as well, Sathya from Medibank. What would you say are the most common pitfalls that you've seen within your organization on your API journey that you have come upon that maybe you've caught fixed along the way?
So not just in Medibank, but in my previous organizations as well, one of the common pitfall I would say is the API proliferation. And that also lies with how the API teams are structured as well. Sometimes they are part of the squads, they are part of the consumer teams, and they do not have a centralized governance teams that helps them and all that. And quickly what happens is many APIs, similar APIs gets built, and reusability gets lost. Maintenance of them is lost because some maintain them, some do not maintain them. And it becomes a nightmare, and it adds to the organization tech debt, operational overheads, and BAU cost, and things like that. So that's number one. Second, as much as we want developers to integrate faster by reading the documentation, they are the first not to write the documentation as well. So API docs, they call it very essential, but then they are poor in documenting. So not having enough documentation, and imagine APIs built by different teams, and the naming conventions are different, unable to discover them within the organization. It's a shame that it cannot be done. So all these I have seen time and again in different organizations, not just in the place that I'm there. But some of the things that we brought in back is, again, on the structure of the team, brought back them as a centralized team in order to create that foundation elements, like providing them the governance guidelines before they can think of, uplifting them in terms of what a good API strategy is, what is the good ways to build the APIs are. And then, as Austen said, all the automation in place in order to help those standardization into the code. But apart from that, we built a hybrid approach for reviewing the designs and models within the team. So bringing a human-centric, customer-centric view, Obviously, as much automation as possible with the tool sets is important, but you need to have that human touch in it to see, is it serving the purpose for our consumers? So bringing that back in. And the last, I would say, is focusing more on consistency and repeatability, pretty much, So that makes development much more faster. And building that in a business language means people are able to discover it faster and able to use it as well. So these are some of the principles we use currently. And I think we are able to build good enterprise services now. And more so, it's uplifting our own teams in this process, like talk about it too often. I generally think that you need to tell something 10 times for someone to remember it very often, So you repeat it again and again and again, so it becomes part of your daily habits. So,
you're making my marketing messaging part. Repeat it. Agreed. How about Southwest?
Yeah, so as far as common pitfalls and things, the documentation one, as you were just talking about, was huge. I mean, until we moved to design first, we had documentation hosted on many different servers at many different URLs for every single environment. I mean, I can't tell you how many Swagger UI instances that we had running in so many different places. And for people to find those, we had them manually listed on a Confluence page, and people would go and try to find first the Confluence page. Are the links working? Are they up to date? Do I have the right credentials to even access that server? It was, I mean, I can't tell you how difficult it was, even for someone being there for quite a while and knowing about how I have to do this. And secondly, governance, as she was talking about, it's so interesting hearing you say these same things, because we have all these dev teams developing all these different functionalities for our digital channels, but they're all doing it in slightly different ways. The standards that they're using, there was not any particular set of guidelines. So we really had no automated governance rules. We didn't have an API review board at the time. And the last thing I'll say is breaking changes. We had people often making breaking changes to our APIs, and as you all know, that causes so much churn when that happens. And so when we moved to design first, those were three critical things we were looking to solve, right? So in the documentation thing I've talked about here with how we now version with Open API and publish to Postman, that has helped tremendously. With the governance rules, we've actually got a API style guide and a board that goes through and builds out our API style guide. And we have basically, as rules get added and approved in that style guide, we then go and codify those in a linting tool that runs across our Open API spec that guarantees that those rules are then enforced. And we have different levels of enforcement. We have things that are must rules. We have rules that are should rules. And it varies how hard of a stance we'll take on certain things. So we've really started to really lock down that process to build consistency for our consumers and really streamline that quite a bit. And then lastly, on the topic of breaking changes, in a similar fashion, as we run that linter, we're also able to check, are people making breaking changes? How often are they making them? And we have the ability to also turn on a flag and say, right now, I mean, you can't do breaking changes. The linter will actually block that and prevent those from going in at all. So those are things that just by pulling the contract to the beginning and designing there, you've got this standard format that you can do all these things with and really develop such a efficient process for this that's really standard and known for everybody. And because we've invested so much in this tooling, I really think that our developers have really come to love it. It's different than going and just coding right away, but they're really seeing the benefits, as we've got this rolled out over the last 2 years or so.
Awesome. Thank you for your very eloquent answers. I want to be mindful that we have a few minutes before Trevor Noah and before T-Pain after that. So I think we have some mic runners in the audience, and I cannot see anything with these lights. So hopefully if somebody raises their hands, they can see. Awesome. In the front.
Hello, thanks a lot, guys. I have a question related to Agile. So Agile is all about iterative increments. How do you guys make sure that your API specifications are always in sync with the actual implementations?
I'd be happy to provide an answer to that one. So the key to that is the code generation that comes from the Open API spec. So if you are not generating code from it, I find that I think that it would be very difficult to do that. We use Open API Generator, the open source library, and we're able to customize the code that gets generated to our liking. It uses mustache templates, so it's very flexible. And we build the part of our API's logic that is specifically in that Open API spec, the domain objects and the interfaces. So someone would really have to be working outside the process very hard to get around that, because that gets generated, it's put in a library, and that code is not editable in any way. The only thing that can edit it is the generator itself. So when someone creates an Open API spec, that code gets generated, they just bump a library version in their API, and that the updates to the contract would then flow right in. And that is the key, I think, for us.
Awesome.
So hi everyone, I loved your thoughts today. So I have a quick question. So now that we're moving to the age of AI, how are you guys planning to leverage AI or generative AI for API design or making the customer experience better?
Is there any specific panelists you would like to hear from, or would you like me to just put it to the floor? Anybody want to pick this up?
Yeah, I can start with that. So there are two, so you asked about design specifically, but I'll just answer it a little bit more broadly, is beyond design, certainly the debugging, troubleshooting support. I think classic use case, developers working with the API, something goes awry, how do you make sure that they have AI-based bots, especially, I would say, because they can just look at a wider range of data. I think for us, when developers will, let's say they are facing a technical challenge, then going a little bit deeper into your logs, et cetera, can be helpful as well, understanding what's going on with the API response, understanding what the error codes are showing, making sense of that, and sending it back to the developer is a great area for automation. I think several companies are trying that. In the design space, I would say that more maturity is needed there. We've done a lot of experimentation. I think the code assistance part of the AI technology itself is showing promise, but there's just a lot of work that we are having to do around an evaluation QA framework. So I think I have a little bit of a half-baked answer for you, that I think this is evolving and we're learning, but we do see that language translation, for example, can be a great use case. And then just support through your integration process could be a great use case. But I feel like this will be a very different conversation in about a year's time, maybe even 2 years' time. Feels like the landscape will change quite a bit.
Very cool. Anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, I think, we have not used it yet, but then as I said, as Mudita called out, quite a lot in there. Developers are interested in GitHub Copilot, lot seen in Splunk, cloud and their AI aspects as well, which would help in diagnosis and raising incidents and things like that. Postman has come through with Postbot as well in terms of test scripts and things. But as you said, maybe design is another part that they can stretch themselves on. I think we are in the phase of knowing them and starting to adopt, right from ChatGPT to everything else. So definitely in upcoming years, I think there'll be more stories of how we have efficiently used some of these bots to make us do more faster. It just gets us excited when we see and come to these conferences on different things that we can do faster, pretty much, yeah?
Awesome.
Yes.
All right, guys, we got 1 minute. Who wants to rapid fire?
Yeah, I have a question really quick. This one's for Austen, specifically about, you mentioned early on about the governance that you set to kind of keep your developers consistent when you move to design-first development. What kind of tools and resources did you use to come up with those governance patterns?
That's a great question. So we found this excellent open source tool called Optic. So if you just search Optic on GitHub, you'll see it. But it's a little bit like Spectral, except that it knows the before and after of your API. So you can actually write rule sets around things that are only being added, things that are only being changed, things that are being removed. So it can ease people into governance rules. If you've got an API that already exists, from my experience in Spectral, when you write a rule, it either works or it doesn't. In Optic, you have the ability to really look at the delta between two open API specs and run it around that. It also has the ability to add links to your API style guide. So when a test fails, we directly link back to our documentation there. So people not only see the failure, but they see the general context, who it was approved by, when it was approved. So it really ties that whole thing together. Yep, sure.
All right, everybody, that is it. I know you have 2 more questions over there. Unfortunately, I'm such a big fan of Trevor Noah that I'm going to make sure that people get to go over there. But I would invite you to please come up and go ahead and direct ask the question. And everybody, please make it to the main ballroom. Look forward to getting caught up with you later.